We've recently conducted a small survey on one of our YouTube channels. We asked a simple one personal finance question. It is, do you know how much savings you need for your retirement? Whopping 62% of the audience said no. There are other reports as well in India that suggest that we are not well prepared for retirement. Hi, I'm Satya Suntanam from Zerodha. In this video, we'll let you know the simple steps to build your retirement corpus. I have with me Mr. Lovaii Navlakhi, a SEBI-registered investment advisor. He's also an award-winning financial planner in 2018 from Asia region. Hi, Lovaii.
Hi, Satya. Thank you for having me.
How many of the first-time investors that come to you know how much savings they need for their retirement?
I think it'll be in single digit in percentages. People don't do exact calculations. And I think for particularly first-time investors, retirement is a long, long time away. So I don't even know whether they think about it.
And also the retirement planning calculation is very overwhelming, right? It requires a lot of calculations, a lot of assumptions. And I think that's one of the disappointments for people when they come to know what is the retirement number that they need to. So people come up with this number, 25x of annual expenses to be saved as retirement, for the retirement. So what is this thumb rule? Why don't you explain how this thumb rule works, 25x of annual expenses?
So frankly, I don't think it works because it depends on at what age you are planning for your retirement. So let's say you are 30 years old and now you're thinking about retirement. Rare, but let's imagine that you are doing that. You will equate everything to the current level of expenditure. The current lifestyle that you're living. You possibly may be married, may not be married, might have kids, might not have kids, but even if you do have, they'll be very, very young. So you're not imagining the type of requirements that will come to you in your future life. So your expectation that, I'll manage with what I'm spending today, maybe I have to think of inflation. Some people don't think of inflation, and that's a big, big killer. So just to give you one simple idea, if I'm spending 1 lakh rupees a month today, but I'm going to retire 30 years later, at 6% per annum, it's almost 6 lakhs per month. So it's 6 times the amount that you're thinking that you need today if you're 30 years away. Now, if I am 60 and I'm going to retire in the next few months and I'm spending 1 lakh, for me, inflation adjusted is 1 lakh. So it's much easier to think about the retirement corpus when you're older. And there are many other complications as well.
Right. And when you say 25x of the expenses, that expenses are not, as you said, not today's expenses. It should be adjusted to inflation. That's how we should consider.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are various factors that come into play when you're planning to do the calculation, right? You are earning today, you are spending today, and then therefore there's some saving. Out of that saving, some portion of it, I'm hoping it's 60 to 75%, but who knows, is invested. Then whether it's invested in the right sort of asset classes, that will accumulate over a period of time. And I think the other thing that I have seen happen for people is as they move up the ladder in their career, the potential to earn more and at some point save more and then suddenly save less because some other liabilities have come up for a brief period. Then those liabilities are over and there is a big jump in the saving as well. So I think it's very difficult to sort of look at the end of the first over, this is your run rate, therefore in 50 overs, this is the score. It won't be as straightforward as that. It's going to be up and down. And I think therefore it's not very easy to calculate that number.
But for now, let's not think about that the financial planning in future changes. We know what our expenses are today and we have some estimation of what our expenses would be in future, maybe based on our current lifestyle. Since 25x is a very generic number, to say what would be based on actual methodology, what would be the retirement corpus one would need. Say suppose even we are looking at the calculation at the age of, for someone who is at the age of 30 and who wants to retire at the age of 60 and for them the retirement corpus that they need is about 16 crore.
That's assuming they're spending 1 lakh per month. Yes.
Absolutely, 1 lakh per month. And this sounds humongous, like 16 crore today sounds too huge. So, how do one go about saving for this number?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think one must recognize that this 16 crore has come because we have assumed a life expectancy of 100. And, most people will turn around and say, oh, why are you planning for such a long age? It's not going to happen. In the last week, I have experienced and attended celebrations of two people who turned 100. So I can start seeing it around me. It was not visible 10, 15 years ago, right? So it's likely to happen. Actually, if you go into studies, of lifespan and life expectancy, there is enough science to say that lifespan of human beings is actually about 135 years. Life expectancy is a discount you get because everything's not perfect. And as far back as maybe even 15 years ago, in an international conference, financial planning conference in the US, I had heard that life expectancy for children under the age of 10 without medical advancement was 115 years. So, we are getting there. So you need to plan for that longer period of time. And that is very crucial. I'm sure not everybody is going to make it to that age, but I think you don't want a situation where your money runs out before you do. So, yeah, you have to plan for that.
So, 100 years is the life expectancy that one should definitely consider.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do as financial planners. 15 years ago, we would take 65 for male and 70 for female as life expectancy. And that's jumped to 100. In 15 years, it's up by 35 years for male and 30 for female. So, who knows what the pace is going to be 5 years, 10 years from today.
Now, this 16 crore, as I said, seems unachievable.
Yeah.
And the SIP one would start, the monthly SIP one would start to reach that 16 crore in 30 years is about 80,000 per month. And this is just for retirement, not considering other financial goals. So there's also something called step-up SIP, where one can consider increasing their SIP amount in the future years while keeping it lesser now. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so, what I have seen is actually a situation where the amount that you can invest or put aside will keep growing up to a point, then it actually dips, then it again starts going up. But for a minute, I'm not considering the dip part. And I've just done some calculation to say that if I invested money which for my retirement is therefore which is long term, I'm assuming I will get 12% per annum pre-tax. Post-tax, it will be 10.8% per annum. And let's say I start at the age of 30 with an amount of only 30,000 rupees a month. That seems a lot more affordable, I think, for people in that age profile. And for 5 years, I put aside only 30,000. After 5 years, I get a jump in my earning, etc., and I'm now able to double that amount and put 60,000 for the next 10 years. Then I go on for the next 5 years and make it 90,000. So my income might have doubled, but my expenditure has come up. Therefore, I'm not able to save the double that amount of 60,000. I can only save 90,000. And then in the last 10 years to my retirement, I'm saving 2 lakh rupees per month. If I do this exercise and I get 10.8% per annum post-tax consistently, I reach a figure of 16.3 crores. Bingo, I'm there and I can survive till 100.
The 80,000 now seems too much, but I think if we break it down, and sure, everybody keeps moving up in their career, if they keep increasing their SIP amount towards retirement, then it sounds achievable.
We at Zerodha have created a retirement table for your quick reference. This is based on one's current age and present lifestyle. Let me give you an example on how to read this table. Say Arya, a 30-year-old with current expenses of 50,000 rupees, would need a retirement corpus of about 9.7 crore. To build that 9.7 crore corpus, Arya has to invest 46,700 every month until retirement age. But say Arya currently has other financial commitments and cannot invest 47,000 rupees per month. In that case, Arya can make use of a step-up investment methodology. If retirement savings can be increased by 10% every year, Arya can start with just 16,000 per month. The second year, Arya can increase the savings by 10% to 17,600. Third year, it can be further increased by another 10% to 19,400 and so on until the retirement age. This way, Arya can easily reach the target corpus. Since income keeps growing every year for most of us, stepping up monthly investments is a great way to save for retirement. We're also providing an Excel link to customize and find out what your retirement corpus should be.
The ready-made retirement table will be available for all the viewers. The link will be provided. But if someone wants to customize and personalize, about that retirement table according to their requirements, there are 4 things I think are very important to know. I call them life. L for life expectancy, you already talked about it, which is 100 years is a minimum number that we have to consider. I for inflation. So, what is the inflation number that we have to consider during this retirement planning? We know inflation eats into our savings. So, what is the inflation number and how should we consider inflation in our retirement planning?
So I think people tend to apply the current rate of inflation for their entire lifespan. And in this calculation that we have done also, it is a simple one number that we have taken for the entire period. However, as we have seen in, say, the last 5-7 years, inflation has moved up and down. There were periods where it was lower. The pandemic hit, there was a lot of printing of money, and then suddenly inflation is up, and now it is continuing to stay up. Even get fooled to thinking that this is the rate of inflation that will stay forever. If you think back of what developed economies really, how they function, they tend to have much lower rates of inflation and therefore lower rates of growth. And if you expect that India is also going to head there to becoming one of the superpowers from an economic standpoint, inflation will come down. For calculation purpose, yes, it's better to take a higher inflation so that you are safer with the corpus calculation. So maybe 5%, 6%, 6 may be a little steep. So you might be okay with 5 if you're looking at a long period of time. For somebody who's about to retire right now, maybe I take the higher inflation because, I have very little time to correct, and put in more money to get that higher corpus.
6% seems reasonable now, but for the long period, we could also consider 5%. But if somebody wants to be on a safer side, they could also consider 6%. Yeah. Now, the third element is F, which is the return that one would get after retirement. For the investments that we have now, before the retirement, we can take some risk. But once someone turns 60, we may not take as much risk as we are taking now, right? So the return expectation will also change. Now, for the previous calculation, you said 10.8% is something that you've considered post-tax return for your investments before retirement. But after retirement, what would be the reasonable expectation from the savings? What return can I expect?
So, see, one will not know what is the return that you'll get for long periods of time. So, one of the things that we tend to work with is to assume that you might get, say, 3% over inflation. You can also do a back test and check what happens if you get 2%, what happens if you get 4% or 5%, and you'll get a band, whether your corpus is enough or you're at least fitting it into the band. But I think I have a disagreement with people when they retire will want to take less risk. Because we have seen very clearly that the time when people move from working to retirement, that particular phase, maybe the first 2, 3, 4 years, there's a lot of nervousness about the fact that there's going to be no fresh inflow. That's when they want to take lower risk. They are worried with suddenly inflation spiking, FD rate is not matching inflation. Will they have enough? Should they start cutting down expenditure? That all happens in the first few years of retirement. Once that period is over and they are now comfortable in that retired phase, they realize that actually most of their commitments are already completed. So now they can start taking risk. And if you think about it, even at the age of 65, if I am going to look at life expectancy of 100, I have 35 years for my money to last. I don't need all my money to be safe. I need certain amounts. Maybe in working life, I would have said, okay, I want, an emergency corpus of 6 months. In retired life, I might say I want emergency corpus for 2 years, 3 years. But the remaining 32 years, yeah, you can certainly take more risks. So people tend to actually move up the scale I have seen in the ability to take risk, and they tend to push even beyond their risk profile and start taking even more risk. So I think overall on a portfolio, if you looked at a range of between 2 to 4% over inflation, it would be reasonable. There will be some lottery years when you will make 5, 6% over inflation. There'll be some tough years where you might make 2, 3%. But if you take that average of 3 to 4% over inflation, so if you took inflation, let's say at 5 or 6, getting 8 to 9 is a reasonable sort of working. And once you get that number, I think it's important to say, okay, this is my run rate required, so I better, hit the boundaries in the over to make sure I keep up that pace, right?
So this 8 to 9% is post-retirement, you're saying?
Yeah, so because we are saying inflation is 5 or 6%, and I'm saying 3% over inflation I need, that's my calculation. If I say, oh, I want 1% over inflation, yes, I can do a recalculation. I think that number comes to a much higher number. So, we'll not talk about that. It's 17, 18 crores, it goes up. So one has to be careful about that.
So the other important factor one should consider when they're going for this retirement calculation is expenses. Now, the expenses that I'm incurring now, I may not incur when I'm 60. Also, the expenses that I'm not incurring now, like medical expenses, would be a necessity when I turn 60. So how do I go about estimating what would be my expenses for my retirement?
I wish there was a great, easy answer for this one. It's tough. And I think it varies from each person and their lifestyle. So very often people are saying, okay, when I retire, do you think 1 lakh rupees a month is enough? Somebody else will tell me, I think for me 3 to 5 lakhs is more than sufficient. So people will give very wide-ranging numbers, and it's really dependent on what their lifestyle is. So I'm not so sure that one can peg down that number. You can be a little smart about it and think of the known expenses. So let's say you're calculating your retirement or your current expenses today, and it includes, say, school fees for your children. You know that when you retire, that is not going to be an element. You can remove that part, but you can add the element of medical. You can probably add some additional costs of travel because you'll be probably more free to make the travel. Therefore, you need the money to make it, right? So you will need to do some of that calculation. And I can't tell you whether are you going to plan international travel or domestic. If it's international, is it Europe or is it Vietnam? Is it business class? Is it economy? Is it peak season, off season? I think a lot of things change. And I think it also then depends at that time in reality is what your friend circle is doing. And then you don't want to be left out. So some of the things you may have planned for yourself, but then there are more expenditure that you tend to incur because you want to keep up with your social circle.
That sounds a little difficult to assume so many things. How about, say, suppose my current lifestyle requires about 40,000 per month. Can I just inflate that number based on inflation number?
Yeah, I think, because we won't get it exact, it might make sense for you to, let's say your expenditure today on a normal basis is 40,000. Could you go back and check in the last 6 months, what has been your peak expenditure? Because there may be a one-off month, I don't know, Diwali, some travel that you did. What was that peak? So you'll get that range and say, okay, it's between 40,000 to 70,000. Work with both numbers and say, inflate them and say, okay, if it was 40,000, what would be my requirement? 70. So I know I need something in between. And if I have that, I'm fine. The more important thing, I think, is that don't get stuck with the number that you did, when you were 30. When you're 37, then you relook at that number, or whenever, things have changed, relook at the number and recalibrate. So, okay, I've already achieved certain portion. Now I need to get 1 crore more in the next 20 years for my retirement corpus to be complete. Now I figure out what is the action plan to do there. So I don't think it's a, fix it today and forget about it type of situation.
What if somebody can't save or come to the retirement figure, can't achieve the retirement figure? What are the options for them?
You look back at previous generations and I don't think they had the type of income that the current generation had. They survived. They were fine. So I think human beings will figure it out. is my simple answer. However, the financial planning answer obviously is, look at expenditure which you can save. B, look at where you have invested and see if anything can be made more productive so you get a little better return. And I think C, which I see more and more relevant today, that people retire from their regular work, then they get into second career or third career. And they are then finding there is a value that they get for the wisdom that they possess, and they're getting some earning also. So I think if you are able to reinvent yourself and keep yourself relevant, you will find ways of at least earning some portion of your income that you had previously through a second or third career, consulting, some new gig. I don't know what it is.
Hope there is a magic solution for that. Now, what is the ideal age for one to start thinking about retirement planning?
See, like you said, I think it gets overwhelming if you start too early because you're not able to visualize. Some people might visualize based on looking at their parents having gone through retirement or approaching retirement and say, okay, let me start thinking. But your behavior may be quite different from theirs. So obviously, the earlier I start, the better it is. So even if I didn't do the calculation, let's say, you went through this show and you felt, no, it's too complicated, forget it. But let's say I'm saving that 30,000 rupees a month. Can I at least earmark a certain portion saying this part I'm not touching and it's meant for my retirement? It'll at least help build that the day when you start thinking, oh, retirement is a important thing for me to consider. I can always go back and say, oh, already there's this pot, so much is filled. Now I have to fill the balance. That's the way I would think about when to start. There are people who, as soon as they start work, are aware about this and start working towards it. And then there are those who are maybe 1 year away from retirement or 3 months away from retirement. I have retired, now I'm going to get my PF and leave encashment in the next 60 days. Tell me, where should I invest? And I have not done any planning so far. So you'll get both types.
When did you start retirement planning for yourself?
Oh, I was fortunate that I got into this profession 20 years ago. And, one of the first things that woke me up was a calculation which was how much I needed to invest every month to educate my younger child. And it was more than what I was earning every month. I was close to 40. And I said, I wished somebody had told me 10 years ago what to do. So after that, you sort of woke up to it and started doing that. Luckily, I'm in a profession where I personally think I don't need to retire. Maybe I'll slow down. Maybe I'll do some, selective type of stuff. But I'm not thinking I will stop.
But you're, I think, well settled for international travels.
Oh yes, of course. That's part of the planning piece that you have. That there are certain things that are a must. Not everything needs to be work. So, not only groceries and fuel and telephone bills and electricity bills, little bit of fun. Yes, some cushion for a rainy day, so medical corpus or right sort of insurance in place is important. But yes, continue having fun. There's a long way to go if your life expectancy is what it's going to be.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lovaii. Thank you so much. It has been very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.